if you think about an accountant, like one of the most common words that's associated with it is trust, and that people really trust their accountants. They trust them for advice. They trust them to know where things are
Yeah.
at. It's similar to an advisor. I want to make sure people understand is it's not just numbers, which when I started into it, that was part of my thinking is like, oh, I don't have to worry about any of this writing anymore. Like I'll do it in college. I'll never have to think about it again, which is not the case at all. I spend way more of my time with words than I do with numbers.
Today, I have the honor of interviewing Kevin Reich to learn about what it's like to work as a public accountant. Kevin worked for 8 years as a public accountant at Deloitte. Kevin, welcome.
Thanks, Joaquin. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. We love having you here. And Kevin, three questions that we always start off with is, in your own words, what does a public accountant do? Where do you live? And as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, so I can start with the first one as far as what a public accountant does. And to take a step back on that, it really is divided into two things. There's a lot more than that, but high level, people usually out of college can either go into tax accounting or they can go into financial statement audits. And then there's probably a third category of, various consulting, looking at risk, things like that. And so for my career specifically, and to take a step back on that, it was something, when I went into accounting, I knew like, all right, like what are all like the great accountants do? Where are they working? Things like that. It's like, okay, they're working in public accounting. They're really sharpening themselves. And even when I think about like auditing, it's you have to know accounting so well that you're looking at other people's accounting and trying to find, mistakes or, things that they did wrong and pointing that out and just making sure that they do everything correctly. So I went and did financial statement audits at Deloitte in Minnesota.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said where you're from. So you're from Minnesota, and where do you live now?
I currently live in Austin, Texas.
Gotcha. And did you know you wanted to, move to Austin when you were a little kid, or did you know you wanted to be in accounting?
No, I had no idea either of those things was going to happen in my life. I grew up in very small town Minnesota. My first job was actually working on a dairy farm, so I milked cows. And I had no idea what I was going to do. My dad was a truck driver, and I thought that that was really cool that he got to drive these big trucks around. So I guess I either wanted to do that or I wanted to play basketball for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Those were my two career options. And I wasn't close to making either of them work, but accounting was great. When I was in high school, people told me that I was a very organized person, which I realized what that meant. I was like, okay, like accounting seems like a good career. And then I also my dad worked a lot in construction as a truck driver. And so he was usually laid off over those long Minnesota winters. And I saw what that was like for a family where he had to pick up a second job or whatever the case may be. And he always told me, like, I've never met an unemployed accountant. Like, it's a good career, it's a good job, especially if you want that stability. And he was totally right.
Gotcha. And is that how you first got your start?
Yeah, yeah. So I didn't take an accounting class or really study it until I was a sophomore in college. I went to the University of Minnesota, but I knew that I wanted to do business for sure. I was in school during the financial recession, so 2008, 2009, and I saw all of that stuff that was happening. And I'm like, oh, I want to be the person that catches the next one. Like, obviously, there was a lot of terrible things that were going
Yeah.
on, and no one really caught it. Um, yeah, I think that there needs to be like good people in place to catch those types of things. And I quickly realized it wasn't that simple. But that's what I was thinking when I was a freshman and sophomore in college, and
Yeah.
why I got into accounting in the first place.
Yeah. And, tell me, how did your degree or any certifications that you think are required to be an accountant? Like, walk me through if I want to become an accountant, what are the things that I need to make sure I get professionally and at an educational level?
Yeah, that's a good question because I often hear people say that like, oh, when you go to college, you'll end up getting a job in something that you never studied. That is not true for accounting. Like you definitely, it's a great job for, like if I take a step back, you need to know accounting, like the table stakes just to get a job. Like you need to know how a balance sheet works or an income statement. You need to know how to read financial statements just to go in and get a job anywhere, even if it's simple processing of transactions. So studying accounting in college is actually very important, not just for a career in accounting, but a lot of other careers, because
Hmm.
it is, the language of business. But yeah, if you're looking to get into accounting, like just take a class, take an intro to accounting class, see if you like it. I know when I first took mine as a sophomore, as I mentioned, I had an inclination that it was going to be the right thing to do. But once I took that class, it's like, oh yeah, this is it. Like this makes a lot of sense to me. I think this is really cool. Um, it's like solving a puzzle where you've got all the
Right.
pieces there and you get to put them together and see how things are happening. In this case, the puzzle being the story of a business. Like, how are we doing as a business? Are we doing well? Are we doing poorly? Like, where is all the money going? Where is it at? As an accountant, you get to piece that narrative together and then share it with people that are making decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there any other titles that like accounting goes by, right? You mentioned, public accountant. What are some other types of accounting that some people might not know of?
Yeah. Um, so if I were to sum up accounting high level, it would be presentation and communication of financial data, existing financial data. And so anything that touches on those topics would be an accountant. So the most common one that people think of is tax accountant. So putting it into that definition, it's putting together, whether it be for a business or you as an individual, that financial data of, how much money did you make? How many deductions do you have? What do you owe the government? Um, so it's probably the most common type of accounting. Another very common one is more business focused of just understanding the business, money coming in, money going out, paying vendors, collecting cash from customers,
Hmm.
looking at inventory, things like that. So it's another type. Public accounting is in there as well, which I mentioned is, tax related. It could be auditing. There's forensic accounting, which is a very small niche field, but it's actually really cool because you get to look into, maybe there's like fraud, or if you think of like the FBI or things like that, it's looking into, once
Mm,
again, following the money, like where did the money go? Who took it? What did they do with it? Um, what purposes were they using it for? There's accountants, for example, for governments of tracking, from a local level all the way up to the federal level. Um, yeah, I think that covers a lot of accounting, but pretty much every industry, every individual, if
yeah,
you have money at all, you're probably going to interact with an accountant or the concept of accounting at some point.
absolutely. And if I wanted to become a CPA, right, do I have to be an accounting major?
Yes. And so CPA, and that's a big concept, so I'll unpack that a little
Yeah,
bit. CPA is certified public accountant. To be an accountant, you do not need to be a CPA, but to be a CPA, you do need to be an accountant and have an accounting background. I can speak to the process when I went through it. There might have been some changes, and I've heard rumors that they're trying to make the process easier to be a CPA. But essentially, what a CPA is it's getting a certification that you've passed the required tests and you have the required experience to meet this profession's definition of what an accountant is. And if you think about an accountant, like one of the most common words that's associated with it is trust, and that people really trust their accountants. They trust them for advice. They trust them to know where things are
yeah,
at. Um, it's similar to an advisor, kind of like an attorney. And there's sometimes that, I'll put an attorney hat on as I'm interpreting contracts or things like that. But
yeah,
we garner a lot of trust. So being able to go through that process, which the process, when I went through it, which I think is still the case, is getting an extra year of education. So normally for, college bachelor's degree, you're getting 120 credits. For accounting, it's getting 150. So it's that extra 30. And usually they're business or accounting related. So in my case, I studied accounting and then I also studied finance, which is very closely related to it.
yeah,
So getting that education, and then there are 4 exams that are very difficult, that people need to pass. Um, and so, as I mentioned, it's able to set that rigor. So when you see somebody that has a CPA designation, you know that they worked very, very hard and they've
sure.
studied a lot and they understand, the minimum requirements to speak to accounting and to speak to that profession. So the test was broken out into financial reporting, auditing. Back when I took it, was called BEC, which is Business Environment Concepts. I don't know if that's changed or not. And then there was a last section that was called Regulation, which was
Mm,
split between taxes and then business law.
gotcha.
Um, so taking those tests and then 2 years of general, industry accounting experience, or if you're in public accounting, you need 1 year of experience.
Hmm.
And then once you meet those requirements, you can get the designation for a CPA. And then to keep that license, there's continuing education that we have to get 40 hours of at least 40 hours of training each year to stay current with
Oh,
what's happening in the field. And yeah, it's evolving all the time as far as how to account for things, what's happening. So yeah, very dynamic.
gotcha. And is that something that you've kept up with?
I have. Yep. Yep. I still have an active designation, which some years are easier than others to find those 40 hours to take the training. But thankfully, there's a lot of providers and conferences and seminars and things like that to pick those hours up.
Gotcha. Awesome. And Kevin, tell me a little bit more about what a day in the life is like for a public accountant, right? Like what time do you typically start? What time do you typically end? And what percentage of the time are you doing, solo work versus like meeting with a team?
Yeah. So with public accounting, I know when I started, um, it was described as like you're gonna work harder than you've ever worked on anything before. And so it's a good level set for a lot of folks is that if you're looking for, a really, really easy profession, it's probably not for you. But if you're looking for something that's challenging, that's super rewarding, that you get to have autonomy, independence, responsibility to move up very quickly and to really accelerate your career, there's no better place to go than public accounting. Even to give another example of that is, generally when you start in public accounting, right out of college, you're, an associate or staff person or something to that designation. And already within 2 years, 2 to 3 years, you're going to be promoted to, senior accountant or a senior auditor or a senior tax person, which means that you're going to have a team. You're going to have people working for you. You're going to be responsible for their
Mhm.
output. You're going to be able to delegate things, which I can't think of too many other careers where 2 years out of college, like you're already getting your own team and you're being responsible and developing your skills as a leader. So if that's something that, you know, interests you or you want to be a leader quickly and develop those soft skills, public accounting is a great place to start. But associated with that too, I can speak to the tax side first, is it's driven by a lot of deadlines. For example, people are usually familiar with the individual filing date, which just happened earlier this week,
Yeah.
where people's taxes are due on April 15th. For some businesses, they're due on March 15th. And so there's a lot of effort that goes into, you know, getting the numbers from the company and then turning them around, putting them in a return, making significant judgments, processing through them, um, doing all of that work. And so it's kind of a lot of highs and lows working through that. And I'd say doing financial statement audits is very similar too. But a lot of companies, their fiscal year is going to end on December 31st, which means a lot of accountants in, January and February, March, their heads are down. They're working long days. They're getting through things, but those are also really rewarding times. Great questions to ask any auditor is what's the worst audit room you've ever worked in? Usually they're a windowless room in the dungeon of some building. But you get to really bond as a team and go through that
Yeah.
trial by fire together. So that's a really good question. Another great question you can ask any auditor is, what's the hardest or most interesting inventory count that you've ever done? Because that's another expectation when you start in public accounting is, you need to audit if a company says they have $1 million worth of, whatever inventory, that you have to go out and verify that that inventory exists. So, for example, when I was in Minnesota, there was one company that did, testing of basically like clinical or lab testing. So like some of the tests that they were doing were on, like human bones and things like that. Like they're trying to find cures for different things. And so I had to go and count, like, did they have these samples on hand to do their testing? So that was pretty wild. And then another one, usually these happen right after a fiscal year end. So in Minnesota, that's January. It's bitterly cold, like 20 below
Yeah.
zero. And I remember stomping around snowbanks of iron ore pellets with various surveyors and watching them survey, these iron ore piles that were ready to ship on Lake Superior. And then talking with them about how they accounted for the density of snowpack and, factoring that into their analysis to figure out how much iron ore was sitting on the shores. And I remember I learned to bring a mechanical pencil because pens would freeze, like all these random things that I learned
Oh
over
yeah.
time. Um, but yeah, so that was a little sidetrack. But yeah, as far as back to your question of, what can you expect as a first year public accounting? As I said, you're going to work very, very hard. You're going to
Yeah.
learn a ton. You're going to continue to climb a very steep learning curve. You're going to see and work with, individuals at the company that are usually very high up and making decisions and asking them how their business works, what they're
Hmm.
doing, all that kind of stuff. And it is usually almost always team-based in that you're going to be integrated into a team of people. When you first start, it's just a team of other auditors, and that you're learning from your senior, your manager, your audit partner, about how to go through things, how to audit financials, to look for mistakes, to follow a rigorous process. And then as you continue to move up and get promoted, it's not just working amongst your audit team, but also bringing in other specialists of bringing in financial experts, bringing in tax experts, working with people across the globe, to really pull everything together. Because the companies that we're auditing are global companies, so we need to go where they are too. Um,
Yeah.
so it's a really, really rewarding career experience.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Kevin, you mentioned obviously like if you want to expedite your career, that is a fascinating way to do it. Or you said there's not a better place. And you also mentioned if you want to develop your soft skills, that's also a great place to do it as well. So tell me a little bit about why accounting in particular is so good at that.
I think with public accounting, as I mentioned, is just the amount of autonomy and responsibility that you get out of the gate. And I don't think a lot of other careers or professions are like this, in that in public accounting, we placed a lot of trust in our college hires. I mean, there's a rigorous process to, get in and interview and all that. But once you clear those hurdles, we do place a lot of autonomy in our team members of, hey, here's your task, like go ahead and do it. And, we'll help you, we'll answer questions. Um, but you get that autonomy to be able to do that. So that's a great way to expedite it. And then on the soft skill front is already from day one. I remember when I was an intern, it was something that I didn't expect. I didn't know very much about the profession at the time, but the person that, my boss that I was working for, they said, "Hey, I want you to go talk with the client about this thing." It's like, okay, well, to do that, I'm going to need to figure out what the thing is. I'm going to need to send,
Yeah.
either a very professional email or go over to them and have a conversation and talk through what I'm looking for, what they did. Um, so immediately we became very good at sending professional emails, hosting professional calls, working through all of that, which that skill is so invaluable of how do you
Yeah.
communicate with other people. And so that goes beyond accounting, like that's applicable for anything. At some point in your career, you're going to need something from somebody and you're going to have to communicate with them well to be able to ask your question, get what you want. And if they're getting off
Yeah.
topic, to steer them back to get the information that you need. Um, so there's that aspect of it, as well as the aspect of being able to have a very flat organization within public accounting. You get to know your team super well. And so there are people that I was
Yeah.
working with, as a first year auditor that, were audit partners at Deloitte that were, I looked up to all of them. I thought they were really cool people, that they had worked very hard and had just a wealth of business knowledge that already as a first year, you get to sit in the conference room with them and understand, what they're thinking about. You get to listen into some of their calls if they're in the room and just see how they do business. And then you can go from there. And even like as a first year, like you listen to your senior, how they think about things, and then you can
Yeah.
replicate that. You can find out what they're doing well and what you would do differently. And just to be able to have that exposure and be in that, team environment is really cool.
Gotcha. And, tell me a little bit more about kind of the logistics of being an accountant, right? Are most public accounting jobs, like from what I'm listening to you as well, like a lot of them are very hands-on, right? Like you have to
Yeah.
go, especially if you're an auditor. In public accounting, is it common to see maybe like remote or hybrid models?
Yeah, I would say that's more the case. And yeah, I left Deloitte in 2020, which was right at the height of the pandemic. And so I saw everything before the pandemic. I feel like there's like a different era, right? Of, it
Mm,
was everything before the pandemic and everything after the pandemic. So I know pre-pandemic what it looked like. And then I was also there during it, which was, me sitting around a kitchen table with, our house dog, like, pushing numbers around.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I would say that most teams that I've worked with post-pandemic, it's very much, you still go into the client and get time when you need to, but there's also an opportunity to work remote. So I'd say what best characterizes public accounting right now is a hybrid model. There are definitely things that you need to show up in person for, and you get to experience in person, which is really cool. But there's also opportunity to, work remotely, wherever you may be.
Gotcha. And what specific tasks does a public accountant spend majority of their day doing?
So I would say we can talk about like a first year staff accountant. It's usually if you're looking through a balance sheet, you're going to get more of the straightforward or simple accounts that you're going to audit. Like a common one is cash, which each account is different in how you think about it. With an auditor, you're always wearing this cap of what could go wrong or what's the risk or what am I looking out for? Because you're trying to find out any errors. And so if we take a simple one like cash, cash is held at the bank. So that one's pretty straightforward. If you can get a statement from the bank that says, hey, company, you got $1 million. And then you can say, all right, well, if the company says they've got $1 million, it's pretty easy. But there might be movements back and forth of maybe the company wrote a bunch of checks that haven't been cashed yet, or they've wired money that
Mm.
hasn't cleared yet. Um, so that's one example of something that's pretty straightforward. Another one, as I mentioned already, is thinking about inventory
Hmm.
is you might have to go out and count it in person to make sure it's there. Other things you might look at is, how has it been moving around? Has the company been billing for it correctly? Has it been classified correctly? Have they allocated all the costs to it? Which it was really cool. I had a few clients that were very large manufacturers. So being able to walk out onto their warehouse floor and see all of these robotics in action or all of these people in action that are, adding parts to, whatever they might be making, if it's a tractor or a lawnmower or whatever the case may be. Um, it's really, really cool to go into that. So you're spending a lot of time doing that. And then I think another thing that any business person should understand too is just how important, it's going to sound super boring, but it's super important,
Hmm.
is putting good processes in place and good controls in place to mitigate anything that could go wrong. And if you look at
Yeah.
big companies, like if you take any large giant company, there's so much happening all the time that it's not like something can go wrong and then like it could go wrong a million times in one day. Like if you take a big company like Amazon, like say that you know, there's a glitch in their system and they just stop shipping things.
Yeah.
Like that's a huge problem. You've got to have good processes in place, but then you've also got to have good controls in place so that like
Yeah.
they're not getting hacked. Or if somebody clicks the button to buy in one click, that it actually flows through the system and buys in one click. So a lot of auditors as well are making sure that those controls in place, that there's no risk that, your cash isn't going to be stolen or, what controls do you have in place for phishing scams? Um, all of those types of things to make sure that your company is running well. And as I mentioned, it's good for any business person because that doesn't just apply to accounting, but like if you take any role within business, like if you take like marketing and PR, for example, is like, all right, like what are we communicating about our company? What is our brand? What is our image? What things are we going to say and make sure
Yeah.
that we don't say that get out about our company or that, this image that we're creating about our company. And so, yeah, you could take that to any function within a business, and you'll understand that. Yeah.
Gotcha. And what technologies or pieces of software does a public accountant use as part of their job mostly? Like if you're a public accountant, like are you working in Excel or a different type of software depending on the company?
Yeah, Excel is a great one. I think that's also, table stakes for entry, or if you don't know it, you're going to learn it very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So that's what we work in most of the time is either in Excel or Google Sheets or something like that of
Yeah.
putting data together, managing numbers. But then there's also a whole suite of different systems that QuickBooks is a common one. A lot of people have heard QuickBooks. So if you're involved in a small business, you've probably interacted with QuickBooks in some way or another, all the way to whether there be bigger systems like Oracle or NetSuite or Workday or whatever the case may be. So interacting with these large, systems to be able to manage all the inventory, ins and outs, cash, all of those types of things. So those are the most common ones that we're working with, but there's a whole host of
Yeah.
other applications that pretty much any system within a company, no, not pretty much, any system within a company that deals with money is going to tie in some way with accounting. Like even as I think through like companies I've been at, corporate credit cards, um, managing all the numbers, taxes, um, even like production or inventory type software. It's all accounting related.
Gotcha. And, Kevin, tell me a little bit more. Maybe if I'm obviously thinking about accounting, and then maybe some other students, what pieces of software should I be familiar with, right? Like you said, Excel, it's helpful if you have some experience with it, even if it's something like, just Outlook, right? Or something
Hmm.
else in the Microsoft suite.
Yeah. Yeah. Excel is a big one. Yeah, understanding emails. I think a common misconception about accounting that I want to make sure people understand is it's not just numbers, which when I started into it, that was part of my thinking is like, oh, I don't have to worry about any of this writing anymore. Like I'll do it in college. I'll never have to think about it again, which is not the case at all. I spend way more of my time with words than I do with numbers.
Yeah.
Because if you think back to our definition of, presentation and communication of existing financial data, like a
Yeah.
lot of that presentation and communication is talking about and adding context and color to what these numbers are saying. And there are a lot of people that if they just pick up a balance sheet, it can be difficult for them to read it or understand it. And so
Yeah.
being able to put footnotes or disclosures, or if you're thinking about internal accounting, how can you write up a summary or a PowerPoint presentation to present to management about what happened this last quarter and what they should know? So I spend in all aspects of my career, when I was in public accounting and even afterwards, I spend the most of my time just communicating and trying to understand what the numbers are saying, because that's really the story of the business and whatever we're doing is the numbers are just reflecting that.
Gotcha. And I mean, obviously, it's why you can develop the soft skills at the same time too.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
And I think one
uh
other thing too, I'm going to add one more thing that is newer, but I think especially for people like yourself that are still in college or, entering into your career is we've seen, a ton with generative generative AI and,
mhm,
LLMs and things like that. Accounting is going to be affected just like any other industry. As I said, a lot of what I'm doing is just presenting data and communicating it and writing it. I think things like ChatGPT and others are going to be a huge asset and are going to really reshape a lot of the accounting field and how information is presented. So if you're thinking about going into accounting now, if you're in school, it'd be a huge advantage to you to understand those tools and how they work
yeah,
and how you can use them to be a great writer. Because that way, instead of, spending hours, writing a great memo or set of financial statements or PowerPoint deck, you can put in the information that you need, have ChatGPT write it for you, and then you can edit it. So you can go on and, do other things that, require more brain function or require more of your time. So there's less busy work that you need to worry about. I think that's going to be a huge impact on
yeah.
the accounting field going forward.
Gotcha. And you get to focus more on that value proposition, which is what you're talking about, interpreting and the so what, right? Like,
Exactly.
gotcha.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Kevin, tell me a little bit more about, public accounting, right? So what parts of the job were most exciting and interesting to you, and which ones were harder, maybe emotionally challenging, or just outright boring, in your opinion?
Hmm. I think things that were super exciting to me is just the level of interaction that I got to have, even as a young professional, with really impressive people, both, at Deloitte as well as at my clients, that I was able to talk to, a CFO or a chief accounting officer or accounting director, um, talking with accounting partners, being able to talk with them about their businesses, to understand how they think, how they're resolving their problems, what they're looking at. That was so cool to have that exposure. And then I could start thinking like, all right, well, if I was in this person's shoes, what would I be doing? Or, how would that look?
Hmm.
So it's a really, really cool opportunity to get great exposure to great professionals that are super smart and super great at their jobs. So that's a
Yeah.
great one. I think there were aspects of public accounting that I definitely found, mundane or maybe didn't like as much. One of them is that I distinctly remember a lot of public accounting is related to documentation. And what's meant by that is we would always say if it's not documented, it's not done. And so we spent a lot of time writing on paper what we saw and what our opinions of it were. And so it's like I was talking before about going out and counting inventory.
Yeah.
After we would get back, we would put together this large work paper and say, all right, like
Mm.
they had millions of parts that go through. We took a sample of this. We used some probability. We used statistics to figure out which items we should select to look at to make sure that they were there. And then there's just a lot of writing about that. And so, especially from a control perspective, it's talking about all these processes, all these steps, all these things that a company is doing, which if you think of some of like a large Fortune 500 company, they might have hundreds, if not thousands of different, controls that they're doing. So it can be just very mundane to talk with groups of people about, just all the minutia of their job and then write it on paper. Um, so that one can be harder. And I think that there are other things that are especially dealing with volume, which I appreciate a lot of tools that are coming into play, whether it be AI or otherwise, that
Hmm.
can sort through just millions of transactions or tons of data to try and find that needle in the haystack, to try and find something that's wrong, and then identify it and resolve it. Sometimes that can be really difficult to use the tools or to put the right process in place to get there.
Gotcha. And Kevin, do you think that in general, public accounting, are you able to leave most of your work at the office, or maybe in busier seasons, do you have to take some home?
Definitely during busy season, there's a lot that comes home. And it's almost like if you look at like people say you can have a job, you can have a career, you can have a lifestyle. There are elements of public accounting that fit into that lifestyle bucket where it's not like you're able to leave it at home at 5 p.m. There might be a client that has a question, or you're working very long hours, or it can be very difficult. So there's a trade-off. And I think that you see that with any, high profile profession. Like if you compare it to legal or attorneys or things like that, it's a very similar type of thing that if you're doing
Yeah.
client service, you're always on call because, if you don't take that call, your competition will.
Yeah.
Um, so there's the trade-off between, as I was describing before, you get to interact with a lot of really cool people. You get to see a lot of really cool things in the
Yeah.
insides of businesses. But at the same time, you're always on call, you're answering questions. There's a ton of work to do in a short amount of time. So there's absolutely trade-offs.
Yeah. And Kevin, you mentioned it a little bit before as well, but if I'm somebody who doesn't really know too much about accounting, what are the busy seasons for accounting? Like which parts of the year are busiest for an accountant?
Yep. So they generally align with when a company has their fiscal year end, which most companies it's December 31st. It's not always. If you think of like a retailer, for example, whether it be like a Walmart or a Best Buy or something like that, like they're going to wait until January 31st in case people are making returns from, Christmas shopping season or whatever the case may be.
Gotcha.
And so the process, how it works is after a fiscal year ends, the company's internal accountants will put all of their numbers together. They'll figure out where everything is. They'll put financial statements together. And then usually after 2 to 3 weeks, they'll pass that information to their auditors. And then call it from the middle of January to the end of February. So that 6 week time window or less is a giant sprint where you've got this team that's working as hard as they can to audit and get through that information and find out anything that's wrong with it before the company, if they're a publicly traded company, they have to release that information publicly. Or if it's a private company, they might need to send that information to their bank for their loan, um, whatever the case may be. So usually there's a concentrated busy season from, January through April, where you're going to be working very long days, 11, 12 hour or more days, and then usually on the weekends as well, like going in Saturdays and things like that. So
Mm.
for 1 or 2 weeks, it's not too bad, but to handle that for a long period of time can be a lot. But I
Okay.
would say throughout the rest of the year, there can be peaks and valleys, but it's a little bit more reasonable from a workload perspective or an hour perspective.
Gotcha. And Kevin, you've been mentioning it throughout the episode, but what do people underestimate about public accounting, in your opinion?
Like right now I'm thinking about my family, and I would go home for Christmas and my family would ask me like, "Are you excited for tax season?" And I'd have to tell them, "I don't do taxes. I don't like them just like everyone else doesn't like them,
Yeah.
trying to explain that. And I think after years, I got tired of explaining that. So I think that's one thing. If I think of people that aren't familiar with accounting at all, is it's not just taxes. Like there's a
Yeah.
lot of different things that you can do with it. And so I think that's one thing I'd say people being the public at large, that's how I'd want to educate people, or that's one thing I would want them to know. I think for business majors, one thing that people are associated with the connotation of people working a lot. We've been talking about that. I don't think people underestimate that. I think what people do underestimate is how huge it is to be able to accelerate your career. Like I would always joke that public accounting is like dog years, that if you do 1 year in public accounting, that's 3 years anywhere else of work experience. So it really helped me that after my 8 years at Deloitte, I mean, if you follow my formula, that's 24 years of experience.
Yeah.
And so it allowed me to interview and get jobs where I was competing against people that might have 20 years of experience compared to my 8. But I was in a great position. I had seen a lot of different things through my 8 year career at Deloitte that really set me up really, really well to have a great career trajectory. And I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what's maybe something that people overestimate?
Yeah. I thought of one more thing on underestimate, and
Oh
then we'll
yeah.
get to
Go ahead. Go ahead.
overestimate. One thing
Yep.
on underestimate is how applicable starting your career in public accounting can be for not accounting. Like if you want to go into something else. To give you a great example is the CFO or CEO, Chief Executive Officer of my current company, started his career in public accounting, and now he's a CEO of a robotics startup in Austin, which is super cool. And the skills that he was able to learn, both hard skills of understanding finance, understand accounting, as well as the soft skills of how to be a great leader of a team, how to execute on deadlines, how to get things done, positioned him to be an excellent CEO. And that applies to so many other things that I often hear when people are in college, like, oh, if you're not sure what to do, like study psychology. I don't know if that's true or not. I won't speak to that one, but I will say, like, if you want to do business, but you're not sure what to do, like study accounting and like at least do a couple of years in that, because the skills that you're able to get, you can translate that into any other business function, and you're going to be very well set up to succeed doing that. So I
Yeah.
think that's one thing, probably the thing that business and college students underestimate the most is how much value you can get from studying that and starting your career in it.
Gotcha. And is there maybe like any overhyped positive assumptions? Maybe back to that, like overestimating um that about accounting that people might make, or maybe overhyped negative assumptions about the ways that may paint accounting as a job that is harder than it may actually be.
The overhype or common misconception, which I've talked about a little bit, is just that everyone does taxes and it's boring and it's for old people. It's not the case at all. It's
Yeah.
there's a lot that's happening. It's not boring. I mean, it can be at times, but it can also be incredibly insightful because you're going to understand what's happening in the business before anyone else does, which is a really, really cool position to be in. Sometimes people will, overestimate the hours or be intimidated by that or think there's no way that I could ever do that. I mean, definitely be aware of that, of like, if you know that you would never ever want to do that, like, know that up front. But also don't be intimidated by it, that if you really want to be, the best at whatever profession you're doing, whether accounting or something else, there's something about going through that stress test or pressure cooker scenario, and coming out on the other side and just being a sharper, like better professional. It's really invaluable.
Gotcha. And Kevin, let's just say I'm sold, right? Like I am
Hmm.
somebody who's not even in college anymore. I'm way past college, but I am working in industry and I just want to be a public accountant. What is the fastest way for me to become one, especially if I just need to get my foot in the door?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that there are a lot. You can either find, a local firm in town, like especially if we think about on the tax side specifically, currently the industry is facing a huge shortage of people that want to go into tax accounting or do taxes. And so if you're looking for job security, if you're looking for, a place where you can learn a lot of very practical information, because people always have tax questions, That's a great way to get into it, is just apply at a local tax firm. Chances are pretty much every firm in town is going to have a job open for, some sort of tax analyst or tax associate where you can get in, learn how to process a return, work in that office culture. So that's a great way to get into it. Another is any type of, like, this is an example. After I left Deloitte, I had considered going into, there's a firm in town, and there were several others in California that were looking for, consulting type stuff. Let's say you've been in industry for 10 years, you've learned a lot of stuff about how businesses work and how everything comes together. And so to be able to take that knowledge and then do some sort of consulting within public accounting is great, because then you can go to multiple clients, you can share the things that you've learned, you can make their businesses better, and you can be a huge asset. And so that's another great opportunity to get into the field.
Gotcha. And what fields do you see people coming from when they go into accounting, if you see any? Are there any themes or is it random?
It's hard to get into it, as we were talking about before.
Yeah.
There's so much of, like, what I call table stakes of, like, at least understanding or having some accounting classes, that to get into it, if you have no accounting experience whatsoever, you kind of have to go back to school to, take some
Yeah.
accounting classes to understand how it works. Because it's really hard to learn, like, the basics on the job. You kind of need to go to school for them. Thankfully, there's a lot
Mhm.
of, great schools out there and places you can go, or if you want to study at night or whatever the case may be, you can get that knowledge and go into it. Um, but it's really hard. Like, I'm thinking of somebody, if they're in, like, pick any random profession, like if you're in a healthcare background, like you're a nurse and you wanted, like, hey, I'm gonna go and study accounting. Like, as a nurse, you understand there was a lot of school and training you had to go to be
Yeah.
doing what you're doing. Same thing with accounting. Thankfully, we're not saving lives, so don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
But, still going back to school and getting that experience. I've heard of some people that they are able to do, like, very basic transactional accounting. Like, for example, you know, you make a sale to a customer, you send a customer an invoice, customer pays you in cash. You can match up that invoice to the cash that's received. You really don't need to go to school for that end of it. But I would suggest, if you want to have a career in accounting and not just be,
Yeah.
an entry level or staff level type person, definitely go back to school, get a great education, and then you can work your way up from there.
Gotcha. And you kind of been mentioning it here and there as well, but I think this is one of the most important questions that we do ask, and it's kind of a good checkpoint question, based on I think personality and strengths. And it is, what does somebody have to be good at and like doing in order to be good at this job? Like, what has to come easily to you? You mentioned, people said, "Oh, Kevin, you're a very organized person. Like, you'd be great for accounting." And I think that matters a lot, right? For like any profession. Like, what are
Mhm.
the baseline strengths, skills, or personality traits that you think are very important in order to become an accountant?
I think it's important to have discipline and rigor and, like, being organized. Like, you don't have to be organized, but it helps a lot. And there's a bar of, like, minimal organizational skill that if you don't have it, it's not going to work out. But if you really like that, if you're going to organize your closet by color, for example, you're probably going to be a great accountant. It's being able to classify things and put them into the right boxes. That's a great skill. If you're really fascinated by business, which I was and still am, accounting is a great thing to go into. It's just a very natural, taking that passion of talking and being excited about business and then actually being able to work in it is really great. Um, One common misconception is that, oh, you don't need people skills to be an accountant. I would say that that's not true. Like, you work with people a lot, and that you might need information from them, or, they might need information from you. And so there's just a ton of communication and interaction that goes on, like, not just with, interacting with customers and vendors, but as I was talking about with public accounting, you're probably going to be in a room, a windowless conference room with your team sitting around a table for 60 weeks at a time during the height of winter. So you're going to want to have good people skills, or at least develop them. Or if you want to develop people skills, it's a great place to do it. Because I'll be honest, I didn't have the greatest people skills when I was in college. And so being able to start in that career and being able to learn those was really cool.
Gotcha. And Kevin, how long does it take for somebody to become a really good public accountant? Obviously, you had 8 years, obviously 24 human years.
I would say within 2 years, you're going to be really great at what you do. Because as I
Uh-huh.
mentioned, after 2 years, 2 to 3 years, you're going to get your own team. And so you have to be good enough at it that you have to be able to teach somebody else how to do it. So
Mm,
yeah, if you want to be great at something and have, mastery over something, a couple years you can get there.
gotcha. And what is a typical promotion path like? Like, tell me a little bit more about like general public accounting, right? Like your big fours, maybe like some of your smaller firms. What is from entry to the highest position you can hold? What is the average time you spend at each level?
This is a huge perk of public accounting, and I would say it's probably better than any other industry or profession out there, except maybe an influencer or something like that. But you're able to start and, within 2 years, 2 to 3 years, you're a senior, you get your own team. 2 to 3 years after that, you're a manager. Now you're responsible for multiple teams. Um, and then after a manager, it's usually senior manager, call it after 3 years. And so that timeline is pretty set. And then it's really from senior manager to a partner or a director. That can be more fluid. I saw people do that in 3 years after that. So basically 11 years after they graduated from college, they were at the peak of their profession. Um, all the way to sometimes it can take folks, anywhere from 3, 5, 7 years, something like that to be a partner or director. But,
Hmm.
to be in your 30s and then, be at the top of your profession for the next 30 years of your career is really, really cool. I think in a lot of other industries, you're going to have to grind it out. You're probably going to have to go back to school and get another
Yeah,
degree um, before you can really be an executive or be at the top. So it's a really great way to accelerate it.
gotcha. And what is the average salary for a public accountant?
I know when I started, it was approximately, I'd say 50 to 60K. I would imagine that number's gone up. I don't know what the data is currently. And I mean, this was 10 years ago. So if I had to guess, I'd say at least 60, 70, 80,000 somewhere in there.
Hmm.
But then if you look at the trajectory
Yeah,
of, especially if you were to go into industry or something like that after working in a public accounting, role, you could probably be at a six-figure salary within, 5 years or less.
yeah.
So it's a really great way to accelerate that you start, at the bottom or start lower, but you can really, really accelerate into a great earning potential.
So, Kevin, I think you are the perfect guy to ask this question for this particular job. And I think this is one of our most important questions. And it is when people in your field move on to something else, what kind of work do they go into next? And are there any themes or can people just jump into anything?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, first of all, because of the people that start in public accounting, only I would guess 1 to 2% make a career out of it, where they'll stay in public accounting and rise to a director or partner or something else. So the vast majority of people that join are, they have plans afterwards, even if they don't have that plan in mind when they start. That's usually how it works. It's driven by, maybe lifestyle or things like that. So there's a whole bunch of different things that people can use a career start in public accounting to do. I think one of the more common ones is just another position in either an accounting or finance role. And so you'll see a lot of people that will leave for, an operational accounting role where maybe they'll find a job at a, anything from private, large company, public company, whatever the case may be, that because they've had such great experience in auditing companies and looking for where things can go wrong, they also have a really good idea of what it looks like to set things up so that things go right. So they have a great, great skill set of technical and hard skills to be able to provide to a future employer. And in addition to those hard skills, they also have great soft skills. If they know how to lead a team, as we discussed before, if they stick around for 2 years, they're going to have a team of people working for them. So they get that great management experience, as well as just organizing groups of people, across functions, which is a great skill to have if you're at a larger company. Even if you're at a smaller company, like I'm at a smaller company right now, and I'm still interacting with people across the organization. So that's one area, as I mentioned, going into some sort of accounting type role. Another is you'll see a lot of people that transition into some finance type role, whether that be, take investment in banking could be one example of they have a great skill set of understanding how companies work. They're great at reading financial statements. And then you can take that experience and then go and look at investment, look at banking, look at mergers and acquisitions, all of those high finance type of roles. And a career start in public accounting is a great way to get into that field as well. Or just other finance, whether it be, financial planning and analysis or FP&A type role where you're working more on the, finance budget side of things, which for a lot of companies, it's really important that they understand where their budgets are, where money is coming and going. So it's another example. I think I'll say a third category that's a bit more niche is you do see people that will go into either like a government type role, or I'm thinking of, for example, like an FBI agent or something like that, that if you look at that organization, if you're looking for crime, you're usually going to follow the money. And
Yeah.
so being an auditor, you have a great skill set at following the money and understanding how transactions work and how things flow. And so you do see, as I said, it's not like a common career path, but it is an option that people pursue. And,
Yeah.
and from what I've heard, the FBI likes people with that background because they understand how money works and how it flows from point A to point B and how to get at the truth. Um, and then finally, like I've known some people as well that they'll take a completely different career pivot, but the time that they spent in public accounting is still a great background for, as I mentioned, you're getting great soft skills, you're getting great leadership skills. You're able to take that and to pivot to any other, type of business type role and be really successful at it. And so those are a lot of different career options that people can go into. I mean, as I mentioned, even at the company I work for now, our chief financial officer started his career in public accounting, and even our CEO started his career as a public accountant. And so there's a lot of great career paths that you can go into.
Gotcha. And Kevin, that seems to be probably one of the best things about going into public accounting. Just kind of what can you do after, right? And I mean, I didn't know the pipeline to the FBI was so strong out of the accounting firms, but that is super cool.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's, as I said, it's not like I know a ton of people that have done it, but I've heard of stories and people that have definitely looked into it. So yeah, you can be creative with that skill set. It is very unique and very powerful.
That's awesome. And as we're nearing kind of the end of the interview, Kevin, what would you tell your younger self when you were at the beginning of your career?
That's a great question. I think one thing that when I started at Deloitte, I remember one of our more experienced partners who's very great, still somebody I keep in touch with. He would tell people that were starting, it was three things. Let's see if I can remember them all. One is you're going to work harder than you ever thought possible. But two is you're going to learn more than you ever thought possible. And then the third one is you're going to find a lifelong friend, that somebody that you're going to get close with. Because if you think you're working with your team for, yeah, 60 hours a week or more for
Yeah.
a good chunk of the year, like you get to know your coworkers very, very well. And there's such a positive team culture that comes from that. So that was the last point. As far as learning, we've talked about hard skills, we've talked about soft skills, all of that. Like there's so much that I've learned. And then, the first point of working hard is learning how to work hard, but also work efficiently and like,
Yeah.
getting more things done. And just I'm always amazed at the output that we as a team were able to accomplish is really, really cool. So those are things that, I was told as I was starting, and I'd say all three of those ring very true, and that there's still people I can reach out to today. I think they'd agree with that too.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. And, where can people follow along or reach out to you if they need to?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find my LinkedIn is probably the best way to contact me. And I'm assuming you'll have that in the podcast notes. That's probably the best place to do it. Yeah,
Yes,
that's a
sir.
great way to get in touch with me or follow along with my career.
Awesome. Kevin, thank you so much. We really appreciate having you on and talking about public accounting. This was a very insightful episode. So we really appreciate you coming along.
Yeah, thanks, Joaquin. Loved it.
You just got one episode closer to learning about the world of jobs out there. To explore the rest of our career categories and find your best fit, go to jobdictionary.com to sign up for the beta users waitlist. Then subscribe here to find the next episodes coming out this week. And as always, drop us a comment, review, or message to let us know how we can better attune our episodes to your specific needs. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, Threads, Pinterest, and wherever else you're on socials to go get our short, snappy preview reels that expose you to new job options every day. Because here at Job Dictionary, we believe your big aha moment can be just one scroll away. Go check it out and get out there. Cheers!